Many questions rose urgently to mind as I settled down to watch the first episode of The Penguin. Or to stay in character, I suppose, many questions nested neatly in my mind. Not least amongst them is, why on God's good earth would you choose a man that looks like this to play a man that looks like this? I mean, don't get me wrong, Colin Farrell does a truly magnificent job with the character, but I can't help but think that, wasn't there a fat, scarred man out there somewhere who might have seen a casting call for the Penguin and thought to himself, finally, this is my chance, only to have Colin Farrell, of all people, just swoop in front of him and take the role. I gotta say, life must have felt particularly unfair for that poor bastard at that very moment. But that besides, one of the more strident questions is probably, why on God's good earth are you making a TV miniseries, 8 episodes, an hour long each, about the Penguin? Of all the characters, the Penguin! He's hardly the most prolific villain in the DC universe. Hell, he's not even that substantial of a Batman villain. Case in point, his latest large on-screen appearance was as Oswald Cobblepot, a gender-flipped version of the Penguin, because the creators thought that he was simply too boring, and so making him a woman would fix that. Somehow. And again, as if to blow up his impermeability and raise it to thoroughly memeable levels, Oswald Cobblepot, a nice, cool, refined name, has in The Penguin been changed in his very own TV series, I will again reiterate, from Oswald Cobblepot to Oscobb. Why? That's a very good question. Presumably the previous name sounded too uppity or something, I guess. So yeah, it would be fair to say that I entered into this series with limited expectations at best and negative ones at worst. And yet, it turned out surprisingly good. Downright amazingly good, actually, in some cases. Take Colin Farrell, for example. Imagining him as the Penguin is difficult to do. And whilst, of course, he did a fine job in The Batman, a movie I'm not particularly fond of, mind you, it wasn't outstanding or anything. Oswald Cobblepot, I refuse to call him Oscobb, didn't really have a meaty enough of a role to really stand out, you know, either in a negative or positive aspect. But in The Penguin, he's really good. Shockingly good. The Penguin comes across as a deep, complex, multifaceted character, even in just a single episode. I don't know if my sense of values have simply been undermined and destroyed to the point of being virtually incapable of imagining competently written characters at this point after so many episodes of The Rings of Power, but in a single hour, Oswald Cobblepot presents me with more personalities, more values, more sides of himself than any Rings of Power character has done in 2 seasons now. Oswald Cobblepot is merciless, quick to anger, prone to violence, and outright murderous rage. At the same time, he can be perfectly placid. He can be perfectly nice and polite, even sharing a slushie with a henchman. At the same time as well, he can be conniving, cunning, and filled with intrigue and plots, the likes of which I've rarely seen since Frank Underwood from the House of Cards. And yet again, at the very same time, he is naive, afraid, unsure of himself, needing his old mother, who's slowly growing demented, to remind him of who he is and how far he's come, and that he shouldn't choose to run away now. There is both strength and vulnerability in this character. There is both malice and mercy. There is both incompetence and genius at the same time. I know I'm gushing to an extent here, but the more I think about it, the more it really becomes quite poignant how complex this character's writing actually is. And to give you some slight spoilers here of episode 1 to illustrate and, build up my points instead of merely just talking at you, at the beginning of the episode, he finds himself in a room with a young upstart bastard wannabe mafioso. And to begin with, the Penguin is subservient to him. He, as he says, makes himself small so that the other guy can feel bigger. He is ingratiating himself. He is seeing the new leader of the rising world order, and he's saddling up to him. But when he begins insulting him, he snaps. He kills the young bastard in a fit of rage, only to later realize, oh, wow, that was an enormous mistake. A moment of genuine human weakness and stupidity, which he later makes up for with a rather brilliant plan, playing the two major crime organizations, the Maronis and the Falcones, up against one another. And this too, his slipperiness, his ingenuity, is a fantastic ingredient to the character. Oswald Cobblepot comes across as a man who is intelligent, ruthless, and experienced. He oozes street smarts. He pulls off these little tricks that are made all the more brilliant for their simplicity. You'll know them when you see them. I will aim not to spoil too much more, as I genuinely think this is a show you should absolutely go watch. And even though the Penguin comes across as both competent and incompetent at times, the show still manages to pull off one of the most difficult things to pull off in entertainment in general. To present you with a character cannot die because he is the main character, and yet still make you think that there is a possibility he might just die. And this is, of course, as a result of the fact that Oswald Cobblepot is not the biggest fish in this pond by any stretch of the imagination. He is a mid-ranking gangster. He's absolutely got an organization underneath him, but he's certainly not all that elevated on the pecking order. This becomes even more apparent with the introduction of Sophia Falcone, the necessary strong female character, as we have in all entertainment these days, though this is actually a good one, as it's very clear that Oswald is going to develop a bit of a relationship with this woman, a professional one and one of mutual admiration, even as it was, of course, Oswald Cobblepot who killed her beloved brother, leading up to a lovely betrayal, I have no doubt. And honestly, if I was to point out a weakness with the Penguin, interestingly enough, it would probably be that the show relies very heavily on him. Colin Farrell's performance as the Penguin and the way in which he is written leads him to absolutely dominate this series, to the point where the other characters almost completely disappear into his shadow. They are ancillary supporting characters at absolute best and passing shadows at worst. This is not a problem, so long as the Penguin is allowed to continue to shine throughout the series. But I'm always a little bit worried in the current year when I see a show reliant near entirely on its male lead character. Especially when that show is focused on as volatile a social setting as the Mafia. There might be quite a few characters getting switched in and out of the Penguin over the course of its runtime, I do suspect. And we might easily run into a little bit of a Jon Snow situation here, where we know for an absolute certainty that Jon Snow cannot be dead, or even seriously injured or inconvenienced in any long-term way, because the plot has grown so utterly dependent upon him that it undermines the sense of tension. I have often on this channel talked about the suspension of disbelief, the contract between the creators of entertainment and the audience, but I've talked about how this contract can also only be stretched so far. And again, one of the most difficult things in entertainment is creating a character that you know, intellectually, cannot die, and yet still make you feel worried for him. And for the moment, the Penguin has proven it is capable of pulling that trick off, but it's also only been 1 episode out of 8, so I am pinch worried about the show's longevity. But for now, at least, I can heartily recommend The Penguin. Probably the best piece of DC entertainment we've gotten so far. I'm pretty sure it's actually... Yes, it has. It's actually dethroned the previous highest rated show, Peacemaker, which is totally a very, very different show, but I can sort of kind of see some vague similarities in that you focus in on a character that has up until that point been utterly ignored and passed over at every opportunity, and when you put that character in a position where they are capable of shining, people will be drawn towards them for the simple reason that they are the underdog. And everyone loves a good underdog. And Oswald Cobblepot is nothing if not an underdog.